Hi, this is Tony Northrup for Train Signal, and in this video lesson we're going to learn how to configure file recovery options in Windows 8. This lesson is for the Microsoft 70-687 certification exam, specifically Objective 7.3. This objective has 3 sub-objectives and they're all really easy. Configure file restore points. A file restore point, well, it doesn't really exist. This isn't a thing. The only reference I can find to the phrase file restore point is in this particular certification exam objectives. So here's what happens. Microsoft comes up with these terms during the development of Windows, and then sometimes at the last minute they change them to mean something else. They simply decide, oh, we don't want to use the term file restore points, maybe we want to call it file history, which is what it eventually became. Now, the poor guys who write these certification exams, they're developing the objectives for the exam while Windows 8 is in development. So clearly they created this objective when the feature was called a file restore point. Microsoft went on to change the name to file history, but the exam objectives cannot legally be updated. So the exam objective is still calling it a file restore point. Anyway, I'm just guessing that they mean file history because file restore points don't actually exist, but I will show you a little bit more about file history than we've covered in other lessons. They also want you to know how to restore previous versions of files and folders, which is functionality implemented in file history. And finally, they want you to configure file history. I don't know why they call it file history here and file restore points. Like I said, there's system restore and file history, but I don't know what file restore points are. So in this real world scenario, we're going to learn how to turn on file history. Our good friend and coworker, Mary, she's been bothering us a lot throughout these lessons. And frankly, I'm a little worried about her. She seems a little sketchy, a little jumpy. She seems to be losing her mind. And she has been writing some really important documents for the company, and I'm kind of afraid she's going to mess them up. Like, I'm beyond worrying about her destroying her computer. I'm afraid she's actually going to go in and destroy work she's already done. So file history can help us out here. If Mary happens to lose her mind and delete or overwrite really important stuff, we can go back in time and find the version of the document that she made an hour ago, a week ago, a year ago, whichever it is, because we can configure file history to record multiple versions of a document. In Mary's case, she's losing her mind and we need to try to go back in time to a point when she was sane. But in the real world, what happens is sometimes you overwrite an important part of a document accidentally. I've literally done this where you're typing along and somehow you select the whole document in your 100-page memo that you're writing, and then you type a couple of letters and it's gone, and then you accidentally save it and you can't undo it anymore. You reopen it and it's just gone. So these versioning systems exist to allow you to roll back the clock and undo things even after they've been saved. It's like a meta undo that exists outside of the file format itself. So let's get in there and turn on file history just in case Mary actually loses her mind. So here's Mary's computer, and I will just search the settings for file history and open up file history here. Now, file history needs to save the history to a different drive. It can't use your existing drive, which is something that you actually could do in Windows 7 using volume snapshots. So now with Windows 8 and file history, you need to configure an additional data drive besides the system drive if you want to use it. This is most easily done by connecting either an internal or an external drive directly to the PC. However, you can also configure file history to back up to a shared drive on the network. You can see we have the E drive configured here, a 25 gig drive, just for the purpose of file history. So I'll turn it on just by clicking this button. And that's really it. You can see that file history right away just went ahead and did a backup of all of Mary's files. And we can check the E drive just to see if they're there. First, we'll just look in her documents folder, and you can see Mary has one important document there. Now we'll go over to the history folder here. And as we eventually drill down far enough to get to the documents, you can see that the backup of the document is here. Now, file history has been turned on this computer before, so you can actually see multiple different versions of that same document created at different times. And we could easily restore them simply by opening them up here. But there's no need to now because Mary seems sane. Everything's going great. I'm not that worried about her, really. I also want to show you a couple of advanced settings. These are things you might want to configure. Now, by default, file history backs it up every hour. You can see that we have it set for every 10 minutes because Mary's work is pretty important, and if she does lose her mind, we don't even want to lose an hour of work. The most we can afford to lose is 10 minutes of work. So for the Save Copies of Files option here, you want to set this to the most amount of work that you're willing to lose. So you can back up your files every day, but then imagine that you screw up a file and overwrite it at the end of the day. Well, you've lost a whole day's work, and I, for one, don't like to lose a day's work. Even for me to find out I've just lost the last hour of work, that has happened to me many times, more times than I'd care to admit, and it drives me as crazy as Mary. So for that reason, I really recommend going for a more frequent backup period, and I like to do the fastest backup time, which is every 10 minutes. Now, that means it's going to take up more disk space. The disk space that you have allocated is going to fill up faster, but disk space, I think, is generally cheaper than employee work time. So for me, I'd rather have more files and be able to restore a more recent version of the document. Even if I have to pay a little bit more for storage, I think it's cheaper in the long run. But that's my opinion, and that's something you need to decide for your own organization. For the size of the offline cache here, this comes into account if your file history drive is an external removable drive. So if you dock your laptop computer at your desk and you have a USB drive that you use for file history, when you take that to go, obviously you won't be able to access your file history. If you set the offline file cache here, it will go ahead and keep a copy of those file history files so you can recover them from your local drive when you're traveling. And the Keep Saved Versions option by default is set for forever. That means that when you make a change to a document, it keeps the old previous backup around forever, even if your drive fills up. I think we want to make sure that we can continue to back up new versions of the files. I think new versions of the files are more important than older versions of the files. So for me and for Mary, I think it's more important that we choose the until space is needed option. What this will do is it'll keep old files around as long as it can, and then once the drive fills up, it'll start to get rid of the older files. So for Mary, I think that's a better option. There's also a link here, Clean Up Versions. And if you click this, you can delete either all the old versions of a file, say older than a year or two, or you can delete all the backups except for the latest version. So you just have one single backup. This is a good thing to do when that drive does eventually start to fill up if you've not selected until space is needed. In other words, if you're keeping files forever, eventually it's going to fill up and you're going to have to manually go in and click Clean Up Versions. But I don't want to bother with Mary that much, so until space is needed allows Windows to kind of take care of those choices for me. So I'll just click Save Changes to apply those, and file history is set up. Now we can just allow Mary to get back to work, and hopefully she takes her pills and everything is okay. So now it's time for another real world scenario. Your boss just called and he said Mary left the office screaming. Apparently she's going off to a winter retreat to write her long-awaited novel. And he wants to make sure that we can still get the file that she's been working on because it had some really important information for the company. So while Mary's on her snowy retreat, let's see if we can recover her work. Here we are on Mary's computer, and let's go to the desktop so we can go into her documents. We know where she keeps her file. No, well, that's clearly labeled, my important document. Let's just open it up and make sure it's still there. Okay, well, that's not a good sign. I don't think this is the important document that Mary's been working on. It does seem like Mary's lost her mind, but there was a time when Mary was sane and was a productive employee. And with file history, we can go back in time and hopefully recover her work. Let's see how it's done. Now in Windows 7, you could just right-click the file and click Restore Previous Versions, but they took it off the right-click menu and they moved it up into the ribbon toolbar up above. Rather than clicking that button, I will search the settings for Restore. And type restore and switch over so we're switching the settings. Now we can pick the restore your files with file history option here. And this opens up the file history window. And this is kind of an unusual interface. You can see this is actually scrolling horizontally, but it's not very clear because there aren't scroll bars. But you see this little edge here? That's a previous restore point. So by default, file history is showing you the most recent backup, which was created on March 8th, 2013 at 9:44 a.m. But you can see here that this is the fourth of 4 backups of this particular file. We can go back in time to an earlier backup by clicking this button here. And this is the third of 4 different backups. The second of 4 backups. So using these buttons here, you can browse through the different backups. So let's dig into this most recent backup, and we'll go into her documents folder and check this file here. Now that we've browsed it, we can right click it and click preview to see it. Okay, good. Those are good, solid ideas, Mary. You've been a valuable employee before you lost your mind. Now that we've previewed it, we can just click the big green button here to restore the file to its original location. I'll point out that by right-clicking it, we can also restore it to a different location if you don't want to overwrite the existing file. Restore to allows you to pick a different folder, but we don't really need to save her newest work. It's not her best quality work, so we'll just restore this to its original location. Now, because her file is still there, it's prompting us to either replace it, to not actually restore it, or to compare the 2 files. Comparing the 2 files allows you to check the file size. So you can see this one grew to 5.5 megabytes as she was talking about all work and no play. And her original file was indeed much smaller. So we'll pick to restore her original files. So I'll select this to restore the file from a backup and then click continue. And now it opens up the Explorer window back on the documents, and we can open this up to see that we've restored her original document from back when Mary was sane. Well, let's wish Mary luck on her new endeavor. At least we still have her high quality work here. This is Tony Northrup for Train Signal, and I hope you found the lesson both educational and enjoyable, and I'll see you next time.